Cool. All right. What's up, guys? Welcome to Hansen Athletics Radio. I have a serial guest, Alex. She's been on here a couple times, so I love to have her on the show. Today, we're going to talk about stages of athlete development, but first, I'm going to let Alex kind of introduce herself, where she's from, about her facility, and then we're also going to talk a little baby talk too. So go ahead, Alex. Introduce.
Yeah, my name's Alex Gibson. I own a facility called APG Strength in Hendersonville, Tennessee. So we're just right outside of Nashville. Yeah, I've been coaching for over a decade now and kind of started really out of a garage. And now we're in a big 6,000 square foot facility. And we're rolling. So it's been
Yeah, I love it. I love your guys' facility. Obviously, you've kind of been, you know, known each other for a while, and I've been able to kind of watch or, take part in watching you grow over the since the beginning, really, I feel like, and it's been fun to watch. So, one thing I want to talk about, because me and my wife are also working on having a baby, is, as a facility owner, I mean, you've just had your first child, and you kind of just shared before we started recording that it's been like more than you expected. Like, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that with like balancing that and what it's been more than what you thought.
yeah, 100%. I mean, you obviously want to spend as much time with your little one as you can. And then, running my husband and I run it together, and so trying to split our time between taking care of her and then running the facility can definitely be a challenge. And so, I had this perception whenever she naps, I'll get to get some work done if I need to or whatever, and it just doesn't always work like that. Sometimes the baby wants to nap on you, and which is amazing, and you don't want to skip past that because that's my priority, right? Is being mom, and that's the biggest shift. Is that's my number one priority, right? And my family, and then the business comes second. So trying to balance that out, so I'm not away from her too long during the day, has definitely been a challenge, but a worthy one. And then navigating making business decisions and coaching with lack of sleep sometimes and mom brain is definitely a new challenge. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. But you definitely have to manage your time really well, and that's one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, on our end, like my business partner Shelton, he just had another baby, so he has 2 now. And one thing we've had to navigate as a facility owner too is like, how do you set it up so your employees, your owners, like when they do take that step, obviously he now can't coach as late, right? So before it was like we were just kind of both hustling, being able to work all day. And I think if you like made the mistake of not trying to build out systems or employees to kind of help fill in those gaps, because like Shelt, he wants to be home. His kid goes to sleep at 7:30, so it's like, we have to make sure that he has enough time to go home and spend time with his kid and be able to do that. So that's been something we've been navigating. And then if I am able to have a kid, it's like, man, now it's like you have to make sure you just have a robust systems and spots where people can step into with the facility, which we're kind of getting more into like stages of facility development over athlete. But I think that's like important things for people to think about. And so on your end, like with the facility side, finding staff is hard. We've talked about that privately. Like, is there anything you guys have been had more success since the last time we talked with trying to find employees, or you're still struggling with that? Or
Yeah, I mean, our staff is awesome, and we have two. We have a head coach, and then I call her assistant coach. She's not really an assistant coach. She does more of our younger athletes. And then we actually also just hired an admin part time, which has been incredible. We've just been really blessed just with the Lord bringing out some good people and being able to develop them. And we've had interns. Like I just had another intern come back that interned for us 2 years ago. And so being able to utilize interns on the floor has also been used just to create a good athlete experience. But yeah, I feel like I really hire based on character first more than just their been blessed to have both. So we have had some success in terms of finding staff, and I think for us finding an admin is also huge, just because as a business owner and coach, like I want to wear that hat so much more than I want to wear handling memberships and doing the admin stuff. And so having someone come in and be able to help us offload some of that has been huge.
nice. So you've recently brought in an admin.
Yep.
Nice.
Typical mom who worked in the school system for 10 years. So she was really good at handling the admin side of things and talking to parents. And yeah, I'm really excited about that.
I love that. We need to get an admin soon too. Did you say you hired an athlete part time, like one of your athletes?
So actually our interns, it was a former athlete who then turned into an intern. Now he's a junior. He's come back to be an intern again for like his senior year. And then I have another intern who's interning for us for several years who's also an athlete. And so they already speak the language and like understand kind of our methodology and more of our beliefs in terms of training. So it just makes it a smoother transition. And then we had another intern come in that coach, because he used to be a strength coach at a private school, and he was an athlete with him, and so he has a very similar mindset. So it's just been a really smooth process for us with our interns because of that experience.
Yeah, and those and when you say junior, senior, you're talking about college, right, or high school?
Yeah, yes. Yeah,
Okay,
junior career study extra science in college, and so they're just eager to learn and ask good questions, and it's really fun too for me because I love teaching, so I love that they wanna ask, "Why are we doing this?" or "What about this?" And it creates a fun environment.
I love it. That's what I mean, that's our aim. We have a couple kids that are seniors right now and a couple that are finishing college that we've trained that I'm, like, pushing to get them in because 'cause I'm like, "It's a great opportunity, you can make decent money," and they already know the culture, they know so much just from, like, training with us for 4 years that it's like, dude, they could coach right away, so I love that. Okay, so let's get a little bit into so I made a post on Instagram. It actually made more of a wave than I thought. I had a lot of people reach out about it. Got some new online clients from it, stuff like that. But talking about stages of athlete development, and I think it's an important conversation because just with my population and then watching what's happening in the outside world with youth sports, this tends to be getting like messed up pretty consistently. So I made that post. You reached out about it. We want to talk about it today, and it's kind of just like stepping through, what development for an athlete should look like. And I'll kind of start with the first one, and we can kind of start talking about. I would love to hear like some of the things you're seeing, whether people are doing good at it, they're messing up at it, or like what you're seeing, in your market as well. So the first one I listed is coordination, and I put a lot of things in here, but coordination, balance, agility, and movement, and basically, those kind of all just blend together. But it's really an important part of the athlete development, and I think it's probably the one that's skipped quite a bit. So I'm interested to hear like what you're seeing, the trends you're seeing, and whether that's an issue for you guys as well.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, I think it can get skipped a lot because we are in a sports environment culture right now where, kids are being pushed when they're even in elementary school to go to all these tournaments and have a high level of performance. And we don't live in a day and age where you can just try out for a school sport, never have to play. And so there is this level of competition. And I think that parents and coaches are trying to push their kids maybe too soon to be at this like elite level, and so it's like, oh, it has to be really serious, and we have to really push to win. And so sometimes you have parents coming in with facility and they're like, yeah, I want my kid to get this much faster. I want them to do speed training, and it's like kids in fifth grade. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't even have basic coordination. You need to figure this out and really lay that foundation. And so I think they're rushing the outputs maybe a little bit too soon. And what can happen is then you have kids come in, maybe they only played one sport and they're like sophomores in high school and they're like less developed from an athletic perspective than our elementary kids. And then
Yeah.
now we have to go back and lay this foundation.
Yes. Because yeah, it's absolutely wild. I think there's like a double-edged sword too, where like kids are doing, you know, sport is so structured now and so competitive early that we're missing out on a lot of unstructured play. Like if you came to one of our we call it Young Bucks class, and Sadie is our kind of director of that program, like a lot of the class looks like play. Like it is a lot of playing, letting the athletes explore movement and getting down just base movement, which like every elite athlete that talks about, how are you so good at your sport? They're like, I'm really good at the basics. And for some reason that is lost in translation with sport right now and with parents of like, dude, your kid needs to just be good at like jumping from one leg to the other, standing on one leg, like climbing over a tire, jumping off a tire, like all of that stuff is like foundational for outputs like you talked about. And like a good story to go along with that is, I just had an assessment come in. Obviously, I'm not going to name names of clients, but I basically get, this long text, hey, we're interested in coming in. And he describes this baseball player like I'm like, "Oh, man," like, they're like, "We need to add a little bit here, we need to do this, we need to do that." Dude, I thought, like, he was bringing in like a junior or senior in high school that's like getting recruited, like, is pretty developed, like ready to roll. And it ends up being an 8-year-old like that comes in for the assessment, and like they're set on him being baseball. He's a pitcher, and this is where we need to add muscle. This is what we need to change. This is what his velo needs to be at. Like all of this stuff. And he walks in, and I'm just like, dude, my heart just like drops. I'm like, it's just so much pressure on this kid to be like fit into this mold. He's tiny, like like it's like the genetics are going to play a factor in like his opportunity to throw fastballs, right? Like if you're you don't see a lot of professional pitchers that are 5'5", 5'6". You know what I'm saying? Like, but that's like the world we live in. So, um, we always try to curb that as much as we can and just be like, hey, we just need to like first let him fall in love with the process of like coming in here, getting better, not setting these parameters of what he like needs to be at. Just work on, movement and development because he comes in and he can barely lunge. His squat is poor, his sprinting's poor, and it's like these are all things that we need to develop. So I'm curious, like, are you seeing some of that same stuff where like parents are really putting these massive expectations on these youth athletes before they even have like any base? It's like trying to tell a kid he needs to drive a car, but he can't even reach the gas pedal yet, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's usually in that younger population. It's interesting because I don't get as much of that from the parents who have older athletes. It always seems to be like the younger ones, right? Like elementary, maybe 6th grade. And it's a little bit heartbreaking because those are the kids that may end up quitting the sport because they're being pressured to. So, and I don't know if it's a social media thing where it's like, hey, my kid has some talent. We want to make sure thing and it could be a little bit of lack of education around that, and it's hard because you and I have been coached for so long. We could look at a kid who's in I'll give an example. I have a 6th grade girl who is just has been trained with us for about a year and a half and just an absolute unit, can clean, can move really well, has some strength, and I see what she's gonna be like, right, as a senior, as a college athlete. You see that process, and it takes time, and you can't rush it. I think we if you skip the process, you miss some important groundwork that can happen, and sometimes it's hard for the parents to understand. I don't care what this 8-year-old can do when they're 9 and 10 necessarily. It's more about what are they gonna be like when they get into high school and into college and playing the long game. And it's not because we don't want them to get better as a 9. I think it's just getting them to understand what that process looks like. When you have them playing, like, let's say they're playing like 3v3 game and they're having a lot of fun, the energy is super high, and you're like in my brain, I'm like, man, this is so good for them. I'm seeing the angles they're getting it, I'm seeing all these things. And a parent might look at that and be like, oh, they're just playing. And in my mind, I'm like, no, this is really good development. But they just might not see it that way because they're trying to force circle into a square in terms of development.
Yeah. It's like they're almost looking for the outcome versus the process, which is like a good example would be like with someone with a young kid is like, did you ask them to read a Harry Potter book before they knew the ABCs, right? Like, it's like they're looking for, I want my kid to be able to read this book, but they don't know the ABCs. Like, it's like they can't write their name. Like that, it sounds extreme, but that's like really a comparable example to what athletes or parents are wanting their athlete to look like at a certain age. It's like they're just learning. And you're right, like that trained eye, like we can see that. So it's kind of like trust the coaches, like find a good coach and trust them because it looks like play to you, but they're hitting all the shapes and positions we'll be trying to develop in training down the road and start to load, right? So it's like all of it's working out, but it's not going to look it shouldn't be structured and it shouldn't be crazy. Uh, you shouldn't look like anything you're seeing on Instagram unless you're like following really good youth training accounts. Like you can't just jump straight to, you know, outputs and performance with youth. It's something that I think is detrimental. Like they're going to be worse off than if they, start with the basics. Like you're not going to be better because you jump to advanced stuff earlier per se, right? It kind of just depends on the athlete.
It's like, take a picture, for example, is maybe you see some med ball drills that a college or pro athlete are doing, and you're like, oh, that's gonna be great for my 8-year-old, but the 8-year-old can't even do a push-up. And it's like, okay, well, what did that high level athlete do to get to that position? Because You have to be able to develop structures to be able to produce force in let's say that med ball drill for it to really be effective. It's like it's just missing. It's in the wrong place.
Yeah. And I too, like, this might discourage some parents, but I'm just like, I thought you brought up a great point where, I mean, I have so many college athletes that I started training them in 7th grade, 6th grade, and I already knew they were gonna be college athletes. Like, just by the way they perform, their outputs, the way that they moved, their anatomical build, I could say with, like, probably 90% assurance, like, when a kid walks in at that age, I could say, like, this is gonna be an opportunity for them. Like, yes, there's gonna be work along the way, and it could go either way, but, like, you've kinda checked the box of, like, what it needs to look like for this at this age for this type of athlete. And so, sometimes I wish parents would also be more realistic and realize, like, there's a very, very, very small amount of people, even all the way from junior college to D1 that get to play, but there's so many lessons along the way in the training, like, even in our realm and just the training side, there's so much more important than, like, their performance, and, like, there's a huge value in that whether your kid, like, the pressure to play college sports or to, like, perform at a really high level that young is unnecessary. They're gonna have to play the cards they're dealt, and there's, like, some kids that, with a lot of hard work are gonna be able to grab those lower tier offers, but a lot of times we're kind of predetermined on, like, are you gonna fit the build and the need for the sport? And so, I don't think it's healthy to have these athletes weighing so heavily on, like, just their performance in sport or being a college athlete, and unfortunately, our culture's gotten to that point where, I've seen some kids pretty torn up that they're not gonna make it, and, it's like, man, it's like, I coulda told you that 4 years ago, right? But look at all we did along the way. Like, look what you learned. You have this habit now, you understand how to train. You're going to call I have kids that go to college, don't play any college sports, and they continue to follow our workouts online, and they want to, and they're helping their teammates or, like, their club sport teammates, or they're involved in their murals, and they're, like, running strength and conditioning for them, and, all of that is impactful, and I think even more important than going and playing a college sport, you know?
Only an athlete for such a short period of your actual lifespan, right? And so the kids can enjoy and understand the importance of training properly. That's a lifelong thing. And the other piece of that is falling in love up to the journey, not just the outcome of am I going to get this scholarship? Am I going to reach this goal? I mean, those things are important if that's what they want to do. And we obviously would let them do that, but that's just such a narrow, of what they're doing when they're in high school. And I think that's also a good point for training is, genetics obviously play a huge part in what you can do as an athlete, but the training can help develop somebody even who has poor genetics to give them a chance to be on the team, to be a starter, even if they aren't going to start that. I think
Yeah. To add to that, I think it's important not to pigeonhole kids in a certain sport too early, which is like the multi-sport thing. I don't mean play all sports at once, but, like, try different stuff. Because, like, for example, you and Shane, like, your daughter's probably not gonna be 6'2",
right.
right? So it's like,
Even for 5 foot.
yeah, so it's like where, be intelligent and be like, where could the opportunities be for my athlete? Like, what's a sport that, they can be shorter and shine? Like, you know what I'm saying? So there's a little bit of
Yeah.
that goes into it too.
Yeah, I'm 4'11" and I played basketball. I mean, I played soccer, track, but soccer is my main sport, but I spent a lot of years playing basketball and geez, I wish I would have gotten into, maybe Olympic lifting or gymnastics and something that fits my size a little bit better, you know?
Yeah, and soccer's a great one that you don't have to be tall. Uh, it can help, but you don't have to be tall. Softball, you don't have to be tall. Track, you don't have to be tall. So there's just, like, for certain events, like, there's definitely things that can shine for your athletes. So let's lead into the next part. So, like, I think coordination, balance, agility, movement, those are, keep in mind that, like, as we move through these stages, it doesn't mean that we just, like, abandon them. It's just we start building upon them. So the next one I have in the graphics is like, okay, this is where we start to look at outputs. So, and I put speed and power. I'd love to hear, for the audience, what are some of the outputs that you feel like you're tracking with your athletes that are important, that you're trying to, like, prioritize in development?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Obviously we track miles per hour and for their top end speed, 10-yard fly, what's that mile per hour doing for them? And they all have certain goals. And we have targets that we want them to hit based on their age and their gender, and obviously we'll set specific goals too for that athlete and what their ability is. I would track acceleration numbers, so 1 yard to 10 yard time, 5 yard to 10 yard, broad jump, vertical jump. Those are precise as well in terms of output. And then obviously we track their weights and their velocity on the bar and things like that. But those are kind of the big ones, right? In terms of speed and jump. And then depending on the sport, we might emphasize one over the other. And as the athlete moves through this cycle, we put more emphasis on those outputs. So like our younger athletes will do a 10 yard fly, so miles per hour, and then a 5 yard to 10 yard, but we're not testing that every single week, right? It's more of something that they're doing to keep the engagement and to have a general idea that they're moving. And then as they get older, like my high school athletes are testing something almost every single.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, very obviously, we're very similar in that, we already know that. The thing I wanted to ask you, based on that was, like, so in your experience, like, the outputs you mentioned, the sprinting, the jumping, kind of the power metrics first and then the strength. Which one of those do you find, like, when they have higher numbers, like, is the strength biased towards your kids that you see have success? Or, your kids that are faster and able to jump higher, do you see them go and have more success in sport? Like, is there one that on that teeter-totter where, if an athlete's pushed more towards that skill, do you see them have more success in sport?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely the speed side of things. I didn't mention this one, but we also do a 505, 510, 516 change of direction stuff. And the athletes that can uh, produce force quickly, get to top speeds, and then also be able to decelerate are the ones that are going to succeed the most in field work. Weight room side to me matters, but that's something that we're gonna see go up just as the athlete develops. It's not something that, like, just because an athlete has a huge front squat, does that mean they're gonna be able to run faster than someone else who play that are on the field? Not always.
Yeah. No, that's I wanted to highlight that, so I kinda baited you in that because I think, I come from a background where, the first 3 years of my gym, 4 years of my gym, strength was everything, and I think there's a lot of coaches still making that mistake where they're worried about the strength numbers, strength numbers, strength numbers. But that's not what necessarily translates over to the field. And I will say, like, my fastest, highest jumping athletes, they're never weak, right? So you have to be a certain base level of strength to produce force quickly, right? But there's also this thing where you can put so much like effort into the strength side that you actually lack on the ability to recruit quickly, which the sport is trending towards. Like even the NFL, like I think in the last combine, there was like literally O linemen that ran five flat or under 5 seconds in a 40-yard dash, which is like insane, right? Like you didn't see that in the 80s, but that's where sports trending. Even the big guys is like, speed and power tend to be the better performers on the field. And I think it's also important to talk about like the when we're moving the body as quickly as we can, like when we talk about, top speed, I think there's just so much systemic benefit from that. Like I would argue that the acceleration stuff is more important in most sports. Like if you can get to a higher speed quicker, that's where you're going to really see some breakout stuff. But the top speed is just the systemic benefits of moving the body, doing the thing that moves the fastest, the most force out of anything you can do. You can't replicate it in a weight room. The amount of force that goes through a single leg at a time, like that, in my opinion, that raises, like Tony Holler says, like everything around it. Like, have you seen that with your athletes? Like when they're getting to really ridiculous speeds, I mean, do you find that they're pretty good at everything else that they do?
100%, 100%. And to kind of go back on the base level of strength, that to me also falls in kind of the building the foundation is they have to have a base level of strength to be able to produce an appropriate amount of force to have speed, right? Especially depending on how developed the athlete is. We might have somebody who's a little bit more twitchy that can get to a high speed, but maybe they aren't very strong, and that's a ceiling that we can bring up for them. But younger developed athletes and more people athletes that really do need to get stronger, that can definitely play a role in their speed. But to your point, in the field, we can spend so much time thinking, oh, their back squat has to be at this number, but their RDL needs to be this number, their clean. Those things matter. But if we're chasing that, but we're not chasing the speed, then we're missing a piece of the 100%. And it's even how they're moving the bar. Like, okay, here's your max weight, but how fast did you move? And I think that has a huge implication for what they're gonna do on the field. And being able to get to high speed quickly, be able to change direction quickly, all those things are what makes an athlete good. And if you can't see that coming out in your training, you don't see that that's getting better for that athlete, and you go and watch them play, and they're not they're not they're not getting into those positions quickly, then there's something that you need to do different.
Yeah. And I think the exposure in training to these high outputs is really important too when I talk about like speed and power. Cause I think back, like, I've even had some athletes that go to colleges and, I get to watch them play like 2 years down the road and they've put, 20, 30 pounds on them, but they're just drastically slower on the field. And typically they're dealing with more pain or overuse injuries. Since we started implementing, weekly speed, power testing metrics, dude, we have so little soft tissue injuries, it's crazy. Like, yeah, people get rolled up on, we have some ankles, we've had some knees, stuff like that, but in terms of, like, pulled hamstrings, quads, like, tendonitis, stuff like that, I feel like we've drastically lowered those numbers over the years by consistently exposing them to max effort movements or, the fastest thing the human body can do, over time. Like, are you seeing that with your athletes too? They just tend to be healthier.
Yeah, I mean, you're quote unquote vaccinating your sport when you're hitting those top speeds every single week, even for athletes to hit them in season to be able to hit them in the middle of the week to be playing a Friday night game and then being able to hit a top speed on a Tuesday or Wednesday, I think is highly beneficial to help with that because you can't load the tendon at that rate of force with a bar. I mean, it just doesn't play to the same.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and this year we've actually it's been crazy. Like, we've had a lot of kids, we have a lot of soccer girls in season right now and football guys. Dude, and we've been hitting PRs, which
Same.
and they're coming in 1 time a week. That that's like, I mean, that's gold standard, like, because like, when it comes to competition play, comes to districts that they're about to go to, state, like, it's almost like who's the healthier team and who's been able to maintain since the beginning. Like, that's gonna be a huge advantage over, the athletes that are not focusing on outputs and maybe are just more focused on, like, conditioning, which will lead us into the next part is, like, I think it's totally backwards, and I've spoke about it a couple times. I think a lot of sport coaches say, like, they want their athletes in shape, but I don't think they really understand what they're asking for or really how to achieve it. Uh, when it comes to, like, with your athletes, like, do you see sport coaches when they think, like, in shape, to them, is that like running them like they're doing gassers in season, they're running in season? Like, tell me a little bit about, like, what you're seeing and experiencing with your sport coaches that are like, "Oh, I want my athletes to be in shape."
Yeah, I mean, you see that 9 times out of 10 with this approach that maybe doesn't understand or I mean, a team can get beat because the team is just more skilled than them, and then the coach might view our team is just out of shape, and that's why we lost. But it's just because they got beat to every single ball, and your team's just chasing them, right? They're not as good at the sport, or they're not as fast. And I think sometimes slowness on the field can come up as being deconditioned. We work with a team that has been to state. I mean, I can't even tell you how many years, but they've won it three out of the 4 years in soccer. And one of the things that I've had really good conversations with the conversation with the coach, and he gets it, is that we don't want to peak in August. We want to peak in late October because that's when the state championship is. And so he has an understanding of we need to be fast and powerful then, so we have to get those inputs in. But 9 times out of 10, coaches don't get that, and we're spending so much time on fitness in the summer. We got to get fit. We got to do all these conditioning tests because that's a marker of performance. And I'm speaking more so for soccer, for the team soccer. This could be any sport, but they perceive fitness, quote unquote, as a higher level of performance. And yes, that's it's the game. But to your point, is their fitness the problem, or is that they can't repeat those high outputs, those high speeds, and it shows up as them perceiving their team as being
Yeah, and there's so much to unpack there too, where it's like, first things first is, like, if you understand the volume they're getting just from playing soccer games, and also that most of these athletes are playing club year round, and then they come into high school season, and I'm like, "So you're telling me they're not in shape for soccer when they've been playing 2 to 3 soccer games, potentially a week, maybe, like, let's just say on average, like, they're playing 5 to 6 soccer games a month during club season minimum, and that's way low balling it. And they're typically getting 4 to 7 miles per game. So you're telling me they're out of shape for soccer, but they've been playing soccer all year. Like, first off, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like playing soccer and they're doing fine. And then you want to go in and you want to add more volume. And you're right, they like really push it in the summer and they come up with like a conditioning test and they do all these things. And it's like, do you want your athlete first off, we'll get into that. Like, I think that's all wrong anyway, but is it important that you're in shape for the first game? Or is it important that you're healthy and in shape when you get to district play? What's more important for athletes? And I think a lot of times it's so backwards and they try to come in shape. And I think by the end you run into burnt out, overuse, you have injuries, you have, kids that are just ready to be done, all of this stuff because you can't maintain like peak performance for 6 months. Like, it's impossible. Like, the human body cannot just manage like, I'm always at my best for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. That's too long. Like, when you've been in the space and you understand, it's like, dude, it can take like 2 or 3 months, and then you're peaking your athlete out for like a week or two, and then it's like, they're gonna have those high efforts, and then it's kind of a rebuild period, right? So I think sometimes they just don't understand the just how the human body works and how performance works. And then the next part I want to talk about, which you kind of led into, is I've asked coaches, I'm like, okay, so do you want like what do you want? Like, you say you want them to be in shape, right? You want them to be able to perform well, at the end of the game. Is performing well to you like being able to jog and not be tired? Or are you trying to tell me that you want your athlete to be able to sprint really fast at the end of the game and make the big play? Like, you know, what do you want? And it's like it's almost always like I want my athlete to be able to be fast at the end of the game, right? Which like you said is the end of the kind of the elite spectrum is like repeatability and consistency. So can my athlete, perform high output efforts late into the game? Can they do that? And they have to have a big base of performing those high output efforts, not jogging, not conditioning, stuff like that. Tell me your thoughts on that. What are some of the things you guys do to hopefully build that up over time? We've kind of talked about a couple of them, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it's huge because that's when the big plays happen late in the game. And to kind of go back to what you said about peaking is a lot of injuries happen late in the season for that reason. Was athletes are being trained, they're being fatigued too soon, and then they're not going to perform their best when it really matters. And when they try to fit 7, 6 weeks of preseason, then they get to their first game. It's not an ideal scenario. Their fitness should build as the season goes, right? And to your point, if they don't have the ability to even have a high output, like let's say the output is slow, they're just going to keep getting slow if they're not working on that during the season. And we could even get into what practice should look like. Be a high intensity effort practice, not just a slow paced practice. Like when we do our competition, we need that to be high so that they can get some of those reps in. And then obviously doing speed training on a regular basis is a fantastic positive. And for us to be able to help get them to be able to use power in the first place, they need to have an ability to be fast. But then when we're doing our training in the gym, we're usually doing a couple of different outputs within a section. If we're doing that velocity section, they might have a jump in there. They might have some sort of bound that's paired with a sprint so they can understand they're to rest a little bit and then have to go produce a high amount of force. And so, yeah, I think getting it to be able to produce it in the first place is really what a lot of people are missing. And if we can't do that, then we can't even be spending a whole lot of time being able to teach them how to repeat it.
Love it. Yeah, I think the goal of most coaches should be like it's okay, like you're okay, like the first 3 or 4 games of the season, like look a little bit out of shape, like prioritize fresh, look a little bit out of shape. And then, I love that you're like, I do think like when coaches are switched on to this, they can make really intense, scenario practices where kids are getting better at soccer and they're getting high output. But then they also need to be aware of like, you can't do that for 2 hours. You can't do that for 2.5 hours. It's like they practice for so long. I'm like, I mean, if I was a soccer coach right now, my practice would be like maybe an hour to hour and 30 minutes tops. Like it would be like come in, you get your prep, your speed work, maybe skill work, and then we're doing scenarios, playing games, taking shots, playing like high intense defense, and then you're out. Like it's not this dragged on thing. You know what I'm saying? So
Less is more, and I think a lot of coaches can buy into the more is better mentality, especially in the soccer sphere of things because fitness is so heavily emphasized. I mean, I made this mistake as an athlete too. I played college soccer, and I was always the fittest person on the team in terms of a fitness test, right? That was like my goal to be every year. And it didn't make me a better soccer player. I was actually slower in college, I think, than I was in high school because I wasn't exposed to good training. It was just all about passing fitness tests. And that to me, when we focus so much on the fitness testing side of things, we're missing the forest from the trees because it's like, okay, if I can really get on this fitness test, then I'm going to be a better soccer player. And we spend so much time on that. They're so focused on just the fitness piece. And to your point, playing the sport in a high intensity way, like a game like scenario for small bouts of time, is going to help them be more quote unquote game fit. You know, you're not in soccer, it's a lot of like walk, jog, then you have to sprint. It's not this continuous thing. You're just learning, field. And that's what a lot of fitness testing can look in that sport specific.
yeah, I love that. I think one thing too, like since we're talking so much about soccer, is a lot of things that are missed. Like if you're not doing that high intensity, like you said, you're all going one speed, you're jogging. My data I've collected on soccer is the most decels and it excels in any sport, and that's also why you see so many knee injuries, right? Because you have a lot of times you have girls that are weak, or you're not working on change of direction in practice, staying in a straight line, you're jogging, you're spending your time conditioning, and then you ask these girls to go decel from a sprint, 65 times in a game and accelerate 50 times, which is way more than a football player, way more like than any other sport. Like maybe basketball rivals that a little bit, but um, like they're totally missing the big bucket. And everybody's always talking about how can we like lower the amount of injuries and knee injuries in women's soccer. And a lot of times these athletes are weak and they're more in shape for a fitness test, like you said. Like, do you get a state championship ring for a fitness test? No, right? Like, so what are you training for, and how are you preparing these athletes in a way that's going to perform well, but also keep them safe? Like, it's a lot. Like, I've when females come in here, guys come in here, and they've had ACL tears, and they start with us. Like, it's mentally a lot for them, right? So, how can we make sure that ideally we don't run into those situations where these kids have to go through this life altering event early because we were negligent in the type of training we do based on the sport demand. So, I think you brought up a great point. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even having the understanding of what sport requires in the game, I think is majorly beneficial for any sport. Is having that GPS data considered. Yeah, there's a ton of accelerations, decels, change of directions. Why are we always running in one straight line for if you're gonna do some sort of quote unquote fitness, even for basketball? Um, Whatever the sport is, you need to understand what is actually required in
Yeah. Which should be, either a sport coach's job or just like reach out to someone like me or Alex and have a conversation and be open to the feedback. And then, I would, we would help people design their practice to fit around that. Like there's resources available. The internet's great in that regard. I mean, crap, you could probably type it in chat GPT and it'd tell you the same thing we're saying right now, and it could help give you an idea, right? So one thing I wanted to touch on to kind of close it up was, you mentioned something really good there where, we're talking about that phase of repeatability and consistency. It's like if they don't have those high outputs, they're not going to be able to do that. So I like the like how Tony talks about like that speed reserve. I think it's important to understand like just that simple concept of like, okay, soccer, is played typically at this speed. And it's important to also, like, side note, a lot of times the reason we're still training top speeds in the gym during the season is because in most time in sport, you're not actually getting to your peak speed, right? Because you're having to react to people, you have to dribble a soccer ball. Like they're missing that exposure in sport. But like the simple example is like if you have a girl athlete, soccer player, you want her to be able to hit repeat efforts of 17 miles an hour on the field, and that's like what's going to make a play and score a goal. If you have an athlete and she only can output 17 miles an hour at top speed in the gym, you know, is she gonna be able to do that at the end of the game? Is she gonna be able to run at her very fastest speed of her entire life at the end of the game? Probably not, right? But if I train an athlete and I have a girl that's, hitting 20 miles an hour on a track with a GPS unit, which is a perfect example of a girl I have going to college right now. She's ran almost 21 miles an hour. Then you ask her to run 17, 18 miles an hour at the end of the game. That's a lot easier because that's way underneath her max effort, right? So it's like you have to have these high levels of outputs so that you can repeat these somewhat sub but fast levels of effort on the field repeatedly through the game, and I think that's a concept that's missed. Like, I'm sure like your fastest girls in your gym probably look pretty good. Like when you go to, I know you go to some of their games, like they probably look pretty good in the fourth quarter, whether they're or the second half, like late in the second half, no matter what. Like, do you see that with your athletes, or do they look out of shape? Like they're the ones that are like dying on the
Yeah,
field.
no, 100%. I mean, there's rare cases where maybe you have a girl who's just like super fast and she can't recover. Maybe a track somebody who's spent a lot of time doing a track and they haven't done it turkey. It's it, but that's just such a rare occurrence compared to the opposite, where they're getting fatigued because they can't keep up on speed. And so they're having to operate at their highest output the whole time, and then that just continues to go down. So our fastest athletes, we've actually done some beat tests with a speed test for the actually for the USR soccer evaluation, and my fastest kids were also the ones that were scoring ISO fitness tests, right? And when I go and watch these athletes play, the ones that are having to get subbed out are not the ones that can hit those high speeds. They're the ones that maybe they're slower. Maybe they're only running 15 and a half, 16 miles an hour, and they're having to run that speed the majority of the game. And that's their highest level that they can achieve. And you can't do that in the end of a game when you're under fatigue. But if athlete to the point, I mean, 20, 21 miles per hour is very impressive for a high school soccer player. Just put that out there. That's legit.
Yeah.
And if she's running that speed, it's like, yeah, if you're having to run 17, 18 miles an hour in a game, uh, you're not gonna be near as fatigued as somebody who can't even get those times. I mean, they're just gonna get beat up the wall. Where they're gonna have to use more effort to get their body in front of the person and use more of their mental load in the game of trying to navigate out of those fast players. And that's a huge piece of it too, is the mental fatigue that comes with that.
Yeah. 100%. Awesome. I think there's a bunch of good information in here. I hope a lot of parents and coaches listen to it. What's I always ask people at the end, what's one thing that over your coaching career is the big thing that you've kind of like? What's one thing you started out with that you've made a big change in?
Yeah, Olympic lifting. So I actually spent some time working in a CrossFit gym, and so I was real big on it then and kind of deviated. And we would teach our athletes hang power cleans. Like I've always done that, but teaching hang power snatch, hang power clean, squat clean. And I know there's a big debate, right, in strength. There's nothing that can compare to the speed, especially for a hang power snatch that you can do in the weight room. And so we do that on a regular basis now, and that's probably one of the biggest things that I've kind of gone in full circle with doing them, not doing them, and now doing them. And they enjoy it. And nation component to it as well. I just don't think anything replicates it. And back to our original piece on weight room was they need to be able to move it fast. They need to be able to be able to pivot eccentric forces. And I love using Olympic reps in that case.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I think it hits a lot of things: coordination, fun, mentally challenging, like all of those things that kind of play it back. And yeah, you don't have an option to move it slow. Like that's what they're gonna have to move it fast, or they won't be successful. So I love that. Sweet. Okay. Well, thanks for hopping on, Alex. Where can people, find you, follow you, engage with you, if they enjoy this episode?
Yeah, check out our Instagram page. It's just APG Strength.
Okay. Perfect. So go give her a follow. Alex is a great coach. Reach out if you have any questions. If you happen to be in the Tennessee area, definitely, hit up Alex about training or even some remote stuff, or, sport coaches, same deal. You can reach out and we can help you guys make a plan. So yeah, appreciate you, Alex.
Thanks for having me on, dude.